The confirmation hearings for Judge Amy Coney Barrett begin tomorrow. The president's Supreme Court nominee expected to face tough questioning from Democrats as they try to block her from filling the vacancy left by the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We're joined by two members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, which will conduct those hearings. We'll talk with Republican Senator Ben Sasse in a few minutes, but first, Democratic Senator Sen Coons, who's a member of Joe Biden's inner circle. Senator Coons, your caucus just plain doesn't have the votes at this point to block Judge Barrett's nomination to the court. So what's your strategy for the hearings this week?
Well, I'm going to be laying out the ways in which Judge Barrett's views, her views on reaching back and reconsidering and overturning long-settled precedent are not just extreme, they're disqualifying. She has taught at a well-regarded law school. She clerked for Justice Scalia. But she has views that make her not qualified to serve on the Supreme Court. President Trump has said he would only nominate someone who would overturn the Affordable Care Act, taking away health care protections from more than 100 million Americans in the middle of a pandemic. And both President Trump and members of the majority on this committee have said they would only vote for a nominee who would overturn Roe versus Wade. As I will lay out in my questioning this week, we shouldn't be having this hearing with two members of the committee infected with COVID. It's rushed, it constitutes court packing, and her views are too extreme to qualify her to serve on this court.
Well, let me just point out, there have been a number of hearings since COVID began that had virtual membership participation by some of the senators. So this is nothing new in this period of time. But I want to get back to your main point. Based on her writings and even some of her votes as a judge in the Seventh Circuit, do you have any doubt that a Justice Barrett would vote to overturn Obamacare and would vote to either overturn or restrict a woman's right to abortion?
I think she's made that very clear in recent writings. And frankly, don't just believe me, believe President Trump. He said publicly, I will only nominate someone who will overturn the Affordable Care Act. Judge Barrett directly criticized Chief Justice Roberts just 3 years ago, saying that his decision 8 years ago upholding the Affordable Care Act stretched the plausible limits of the text and criticized him for not being a proper textualist. This is hard for your average American to follow, I think. When I spoke with a constituent here in Delaware last week, someone with a pre-existing condition, she said, I thought this was settled. I thought years ago that the Supreme Court upheld the Affordable Care Act. I said, that's right. But Republicans in the Senate and President Trump keep trying to overturn it. This is their last desperate measure to jam someone onto the court to accomplish that goal by Supreme Court decision, what they couldn't accomplish by legislative action in the Congress.
All right. Senator, I want to talk to you about a different subject related to this, though. You're a member of the Biden inner circle, and the former vice president has been asked repeatedly, if you become president, will you move to pack the court? Will you move to increase the number of justices? Here was his answer this week to that.
They'll know my opinion of court packing when the election is over, but you know, the moment I answer that question, the headline in every one of your papers will be about that.
Senator, I've been doing this a long time, and I don't understand that answer. He says, you'll find out what my position is after the election, and if I were to tell you, it would be a headline in every paper. Why not just be straight with the American voters on this issue before the election?
Well, Chris, as a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I'll tell you, for the last 4 years, I've seen unprecedented court packing, where nominees to fill lifetime seats in the federal judiciary, who the American Bar Association said were not qualified, got jammed through. Instead of passing a COVID relief package that will help millions of Americans who are unemployed, who've been infected, whose businesses or employers have closed, we're focusing on jamming through Judge Barrett. I think this constitutes court packing.
But Senator,
and frankly, I think that's the implication of what Joe Biden was saying.
No, Senator, with all due respect, you're not being straight with me and you're not answering my question. We have 23 days left until the election. Can Vice President Biden, can Senator Harris, his running mate, can they continue to stonewall on a perfectly legitimate question? Biden says it's legitimate. If you're elected, will you try to change one of the three branches of government by adding justices to the court? There haven't been any more than 9 justices, I think it's since the 1870s. It's a pretty important question. Can he hold out and stonewall on that issue for 3 weeks?
Well, Chris, for the coming week, what I'm holding out is hope that there are still 2 more Republicans who might join with the 2 Republicans who've already said, based on what they did 4 years ago in refusing to give a hearing or a vote to Judge Merrick Garland, they should not be doing this now. Senator Murkowski, Republican from Alaska, said fair is fair. If that's what we did during the election 4 years ago, now with the election already underway, with voting already happening in 27 states, 4 million votes being cast, we should not be racing ahead. I am concerned, and so are some members
but that's
of
a different.
the majority.
Let me just say, and I've just got to say, that's a different issue than packing the court. That's the question, is whether or not the court should, the Senate should vote to confirm Barrett. That's different than changing the number of justices on the court. Senator Coons, I got to leave it there. Thank you. As always, thank you for joining us.